When chaos erupted around us, I turned to Chloe and met her gaze. "How long has this been going on between you two?" Her face tensed, wary, like a cornered stray. Her eyes darted, uneasy, before she shouted over the noise of the crowd. "Why did you hit him?" People were staring, curious and alarmed, glancing between the man sprawled on the ground and me, the one who had put him there. "He said you two were together," I replied without a trace of regret. "I couldn't just let him walk away after that." Chloe immediately protested. "But he didn't even say anything to you." I sighed, realizing I'd have to explain more openly than I wanted to. Taking her hand, I pulled her away from the crowd to the hotel balcony, where the city lights glimmered below. But the view didn't interest me. "Owen, what were you thinking? You just hit Luke for no reason." She looked at me, stunned, as if she couldn't comprehend why I would do something like that. Did she really think I'd acted impulsively? "It wasn't an accident," I said, irritated. "I'm not some psycho who hits people for no reason. It was because of what he did. With you." She started crying, tears streaking down her cheeks as she whispered, her voice breaking. "How could you say that? I would never—" I didn't let her finish. "Yes, you would. And lying won't fix anything now." Her voice trembled. She was barely holding on. "Why do you think that? I've always been honest with you." "Enough," I replied, losing patience. "I've known about this for weeks, Chloe. I knew you were seeing someone else. Tonight I finally realized who. He didn't even need to say a word." She looked utterly stunned, whispering faintly, "I just don't understand." We stood there, distant sirens already signaling the arrival of police or medics. The night had spiraled out of control, and there was no turning back. All that was left was to say the truth. I told her to wait there, my tone leaving no room for argument. I returned to our table, grabbed my drink and my cigar case, the one Chloe had gifted me last year, complete with the cutter and lighter I'd come to love. I had bought her a sapphire and emerald pendant to celebrate her promotion. Thoughtful gifts had become our tradition, carefully chosen and deeply meaningful, symbols of what we meant to each other. When I came back, she was hunched over on one of the metal chairs scattered across the hotel's balcony, rented by her company for the awards ceremony. I sat beside her, raising my hand to silence her as she began to speak. Slowly, I took out a cigar, cut the tip, lit it, and took a drag until the end glowed bright. Finally, I looked her in the eye. "You've been seeing someone else for weeks, maybe longer. You thought you'd hidden it well, but I knew. Your stories gave you away." Her face twisted in shock. "My stories? What are you even talking about?" A bitter laugh escaped me. "Those little stories you and your friends share every time we're together. We're still young. 9 years of marriage with our daughter Lillian, our lives intertwined with friends who live just like us. Call us yuppies if you want. Every weekend we'd gather, sometimes at someone's house, sometimes by the lake, grilling, drinking, just relaxing. The men would group together, the women in their own, and we'd all share stories. The guys talked about their conversations with their wives, about plans and trips they wanted to take with their kids. Life felt so simple then, or so I thought, until all those small moments started to add up, leaving me here, sitting next to Chloe, wondering how it all had fallen apart so catastrophically. The conversations flowed naturally, touching on business, politics, and of course, sports. Each person tried to outdo the last with the funniest or most engaging story, filling the air with bursts of laughter that echoed around the room. Nearby, the women were engaged in their lively discussions, though the topics differed slightly. There were no strict divisions. People moved freely between groups, shared jokes, told stories, or paused for a warm hug or a hearty handshake. This was a familiar scene whenever our friends gathered. I had spent enough time among the women to recognize the familiar topics of their conversations: husbands, children, and their latest shopping finds. Truthfully, we men occasionally discussed these topics too, though from a different angle. The women's conversations began lightly, drifting from general updates to their husbands' latest antics, each story building inevitably toward playful critiques of things we men supposedly got wrong. The highlight of their talks often came with stories about their husbands' quirks, which sparked more laughter than even tales about the children. It would start simply. One woman would share a funny incident for everyone's amusement, and then the stories would roll on, each trying to top the last with another misstep of her spouse. The room filled with laughter and playful jabs, with each story adding a bit of spice to the gathering. Eventually, the rising humor would be interrupted by the kids, someone needing a snack, a kiss after a fall, or just a bit of attention. The kids didn't bother me. They were just being kids. Over time, I came to see this as a natural flow when women gathered, and honestly, I agreed that some men could be inattentive and often benefited from their wives' patience. For the women, these stories were a light-hearted way to vent, a chance to turn irritation into humor. But the first time I overheard them, it caught me off guard. I was in the kitchen, checking on the steaks when their laughter drew my attention. May was teasing Dom, saying he likes to toss his socks towards the laundry basket as if he's making three-point shots, even adding a spin as if he's performing for an audience. Well, at least he tries, laughed Danny. Greg, on the other hand, just drops his socks on the floor like they'll magically vanish the moment he takes them off. Every laundry day, I'm picking them up all over the house. Freddie chimed in. Socks aren't the worst. What drives me crazy are the stains, and Vern always leaves his boxers inside out when he takes them off. I have to turn them right side out before washing. Just imagine that. I struggled to stifle my laughter, picturing Vern oblivious to it all. Then Georgina added with a grin, Pete rolls them up in little balls and hides them in his socks if there are stains on them. Every time I have to dig them out when I do the laundry. Reggie jumped in. Are those the Minion socks? Georgina shook her head, laughing. No, he's moved on to Avengers socks now. Iron Man? Freddie teased. No, some hero in a tight suit, replied Georgina with a straight face. The room exploded with laughter, the kind that seemed to shake the walls. With a single careless remark, she threw Pete's reputation into the insatiable gossip machine of the women's circle, and from there, the wave of criticism only gained momentum. With each new comment, the words grew sharper, and the women discussed everything they could about their husbands. Pete supposedly lacked enthusiasm, Stan had clumsy attempts at romance, and Tom, well, as they joked, his belly didn't just need a corset, but practically a bustier. Not one husband escaped a symbolic jab. None were spared, as each wife tried to paint her spouse in the most unflattering light. I was struck by it, especially because Tom didn't even look out of shape. I thought these women were content in their marriages, but it seemed they were engaged in a silent competition to make their husbands appear as unappealing as possible. There was laughter, of course, but beneath it ran a troubling undercurrent of disdain. How could they then go home and look these men in the eye, knowing the thoughts stewing in their minds, whether they believed their words or not? At best, it felt like betrayal. At worst, malicious ridicule. There wasn't an ounce of respect in sight. I was glad Chloe usually kept herself out of these conversations. She'd sometimes walk past with a smile or a nod, but she never joined in, until 3 weeks ago. We were visiting Klaus and Ingrid, and as I walked past the living room window, I saw Chloe sitting with that group, a glass of wine in hand, laughing along with them. It caught me off guard and piqued my interest. I settled nearby, staying out of sight but within earshot, and listened to the familiar flow of complaints and jokes about the husband's annoying habits. I listened, stunned, as I heard Chloe adding her own thoughts. Oh, I know about that, she said. The sounds Owen makes when he brushes his teeth. She imitated a strange mix of choking, sneezing, and purring noises. I felt my face flush with heat. That's how Vern sounded when well, last night, Freddie added, laughing. A real romantic, Chloe replied, laughing. But my husband? Oh, he's even better. When Owen finishes, it's like a vet suddenly reaching into a cow. Her laughter grew even louder. "No tenderness, no romantic dinner, straight to business," Annie joked, and Chloe laughed even harder. "Not a single flower," Chloe added, sparking another burst of laughter. I didn't listen further. I knew how I came across, and I definitely didn't need to hear their distorted version. Chloe's words were completely untrue. I don't make ridiculous noises in bed. Rather, I'm quiet, sometimes with a deep sigh, like someone bracing for a dull ache. I wasn't about to make a scene in front of everyone, so I stayed calm, but I felt slightly distanced for the rest of the day. After we returned home and put our 5-year-old daughter Lillian to bed, we simply went to sleep. But Chloe's words kept replaying in my mind, and I knew they would haunt me until I understood why she said them. On Monday, I decided to have lunch with Thomas Hernandez from HR. I paid the bill and shared what I'd overheard. Thomas, of German descent and a former psychologist before joining HR, listened attentively. He was known for his serious, sometimes overly serious approach. "Ah," he said, adopting an exaggerated German accent. "You've come to a German because we're known for our emotional delicacy, yeah?" He returned to his usual tone, noticing my blank look. "Sorry," he added with a grin. "Kidding." I just shrugged. "Yeah, got it." "So what's the question?" he asked. "I want to understand why women do this. Why did my wife say something so untrue about me?" Thomas thoughtfully bit his lip, glancing down at the menu. "Have you ever heard my theory on intimate economy?" I nodded. He'd once shared it during a dull work conference. "Well, if you want my opinion, she might have joined in on the husband talk for one of 3 reasons," he said. "Which one is true? I can't say without talking to her myself, and I take it you don't want me to do that." I shook my head. I couldn't let her share this with her witches' circle. If she did, I'd become a laughingstock among husbands in no time. The core issue was clear. She felt disconnected from the women in her group. Now, to bridge that gap, she was ready to risk my reputation. I nodded, signaling my understanding. I had suspected this before. And yet, after all these years with this group, I couldn't understand why she suddenly needed to grow so close to them. Another thought crossed my mind. Perhaps I had offended her in some way, knowingly or unknowingly, and this was her subtle way of exacting revenge. I nodded again. How can a man figure out what upset a woman when she brings it up only months or even years later? Maybe I'd forgotten something important. A birthday, an anniversary, or worse, some occasion she'd hinted at that I'd completely ignored. Another thought crossed my mind. Maybe she wanted to demean me in her social circle to garner sympathy or attention for some personal reason. "Do you think she's actually trying to turn them against me?" I asked. He shrugged. "Not the first time, right? This happens in families all the time, even among siblings. It's part of what they call the theory of intimate economy. Essentially, it's a strategy of putting someone down to elevate oneself, gaining resources or influence by placing others in a weaker position." As he pondered out loud over lunch, I remembered why I seldom invited him to lunch. But he did give me plenty of food for thought. "Who's hosting the gathering this weekend?" I asked later that week, trying to sound casual. If she guessed I was analyzing her, I'd be in for several days of cold silence and sharp remarks. And I love her. I didn't want that. "Annie and Greg are hosting," she replied. "It'll be nice. You always seem to enjoy chatting with the girls." "Yeah, they're a lively bunch," I said, nodding in agreement. "You seem closer to them than before," I noted. "I do, finally. I don't even know why it took me so long to feel comfortable around them," she replied. I wondered. Perhaps it was because, from my observations, they were utterly ruthless and completely disloyal to each other. How could anyone truly relax around people like that? Noticing this, I started paying closer attention to the dynamics within their group. Whenever one member was absent, the others would immediately start tearing down her reputation, like sharks smelling blood. Thomas once explained to me that while men typically handle conflicts head-on, women often rely on gossip as a primary tool, avoiding open confrontations. In the traditional division of roles, Women gathered resources like berries and seeds, which weren't as nourishing as the meat men brought back from hunting. So, women developed strategies to obtain resources from men. In exchange, they offered exclusivity and intimacy, things men valued highly. To attract men's attention and stand out among other women, they used makeup, clothing, and other social displays. Gossip was yet another weapon in this competition, allowing them to question other women's loyalty or appeal, thereby elevating their own status within the group. When a woman hints that another woman is unreliable, it's a survival tactic. But why don't they just accuse each other directly? I asked. Because that would ruin the whole effect, he explained. Direct accusations weaken the impact. The power of gossip lies in its subtlety, in how it's used sparingly. If she presented it as a personal experience, she'd risk being implicated in the same behavior and it would only damage her status. Even a small slip can severely impact her position. So, gossip is the answer? Somehow it all feels wrong. He smirked and said, "Our minds are just built that way. But if everyone is aware that gossip swirls around them, even if it's spoken only in close circles, why does no one ever dare to expose it?" Research suggests that most women believe that if someone were to speak poorly of them, their friends would come to their defense. Nearly every woman interviewed claimed she would always protect her friends and would never spread harmful rumors. But if this were truly the case, gossip wouldn't exist, and I had my doubts about these statements. After a brief pause, he added, "Perhaps it's about exclusivity." He explained, "If a woman is known for openly expressing affection, it changes social dynamics, much like when a product becomes overly available on the market. When supply increases, the value drops, making it easier for a man to get what he wants without putting in much effort in return." He went on, suggesting that if a woman's reputation as faithful and selective is questioned, it could lower the perceived value of other women who remain committed to one partner. He took a sip of wine, nodding in satisfaction at its taste. I muttered in response, half regretting that I'd even asked him. Seeing oneself merely as a resource, with loyalty as some kind of bargaining tool, was rather sobering. This thought sparked something else in me. When Chloe and I got married, she promised me loyalty, and I assumed intimacy would naturally follow that promise. But was I getting anything out of this? The lack of intimacy was evident. It was impossible to deny. At best, it happened once a week, more often once a month, and it was far from the closeness I had dreamed of. And if my suspicions were correct, I wasn't her only partner. Maybe she had someone else. So I started to pay closer attention. I wasn't going to accuse her without proof. I wasn't even sure I was right, and a false accusation could end in disaster. I loved my wife but knew her well enough to understand her tendency for impulsive or self-destructive actions, so I watched her silently for nearly a month. Nothing obvious stood out, except for her growing habit of making sarcastic jabs at me in front of friends. Then came the night of the awards ceremony at her company. Surveying the room full of her colleagues, I wondered if I'd missed a hint, a subtle flirtation or attachment at work. It made sense. After all, she spent most of her time there, from early morning to evening. She didn't go on business trips, and aside from her annual birthdays with friends, she almost never had girls' nights. On the rare occasions they did, her friends booked a room together, and I'd already checked all the photos and timestamps on social media and her phone. If anything was off, it would have shown in some impossible time gaps. Still, I couldn't entirely dismiss the possibility that something was happening at work. Where else could such an opportunity arise? I began watching even more closely, looking for signs. Perhaps it was my heightened awareness, or maybe it was his unfortunate mustache, but I noticed him immediately. He moved confidently through the room, greeting people and shaking hands until he reached our table. When he finally approached us, he greeted everyone else first, then turned to Chloe. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and a short, barely noticeable smile passed between them. Then he addressed me, his lips curling into a faint, disdainful smirk. He casually brushed his fingers over his shoulder, as if flicking away a speck of dust. Just 2 quick movements, but it was enough for me to understand everything. That gesture was meant to belittle me, to dismiss me as something insignificant. Instincts took over. I stood up, leaned across the table, and struck him on the left side of his face with all the strength I could muster. I'm not a fighter and lack a boxer's power, but the blow was solid. He hit the floor with a thud, and in an instant, chaos erupted. The crowd buzzed, startled by this sudden, unpredictable drama in their otherwise predictable evening. They reveled in the freedom that came with shedding the weight of guilt, their voices filled with carefree laughter and reckless shouts. Chloe had thought she could carry on an affair without consequence, but her plans fell apart at the worst possible moment and in the most painful way. Her workplace, a company dominated by successful women, icons of modernity, was a place where her colleagues strove for success yet yearned for true intimacy with the men in their lives, if they had them. Chloe's betrayal, now a public scandal, shattered her carefully maintained image, causing a wave of insecurity among her colleagues, who now feared their own partners might question the stability they projected. Chloe had lost all hope of regaining the favor of those around her. It was those exaggerated tales you spun for your friends, where you meticulously highlighted my flaws and twisted our life through the lens of your perspective. That's how I found out everything. The level of disrespect in the details you invented with such creative zeal was staggering. If only you could channel that imagination into writing fiction, you might have become an incredible author. Was all of it just to evoke pity from your friends before you left? I asked. She froze, then nodded. Yes, she whispered. So you had been planning to leave all along? My life felt empty, she murmured, her voice trembling with emotion, as if I was living off the cold leftovers in an empty kitchen. Her gaze met mine, steady despite her tears. I was scared, she admitted. I narrowed my eyes. Scared of me? Did you think I might hurt you? She shook her head sharply. A tear fell onto my hand, cold and sharp as glass, a drop of pure betrayal. No, I knew you would never harm me. I was afraid of being alone. And so you did the one thing that inevitably led to that, I replied, striving to remain calm. It's illogical. Besides, you had Mr. Mustache from the 70s as a backup plan. You were ready to swap me out for him just like that. She dabbed at her eyes. No, it wasn't like that. I knew from the start he would never be something real. The first time it happened, it took me a long time to decide, but once I did, I crossed a line from which I couldn't return. I became the person I despised, a cheater. After that, it all just continued. It wasn't about him. I just wanted out of this marriage. I was drained, feeling responsible for 3 people in everything I did. You threw away our marriage in a single moment, I said, struggling to hide my emotions. Who was this woman? Where had the kind, loving girl I married gone? She gave a bitter smile. Lucky me. You could have just told me, Owen, you're a lousy husband and I want out. I'll hire a lawyer, and in 6 months I'll be free to be with Mr. Mustache whenever I want. You could have done that. There was no need to betray me. I was scared, she repeated, afraid of being alone. Well, congratulations, Chloe. You wanted to rid yourself of both of us, and now you're about to dive into your own version of solitude. You'll face your fear living in it. Yes, it will be costly, I added, but maybe that's the price for what you wanted. After all, you earn more than I do, and we both know I can provide a more stable home for Lillian. So yes, alimony and child support will be expensive, but you'll get the freedom you sought. She pressed her lips together and nodded, accepting this with somber resignation. And so our marriage ended, in a finale as cold as stone, though the voices in my head still insisted something had been left unsaid. People wanted specifics. They asked who was involved, why it happened, how often, and if this other man was truly better than me. In the end, the story that spread became painfully familiar. She had cheated. and, as usual, the conversation turned to the consequences. I had an idea. I set a condition. You need to go to our friends and tell them the truth. Admit that you lied about me, that you made all of this up to look like the victim when you left. She took a deep breath and nodded. All right, I can do that. You lied about me, I said, barely containing my anger. The level of disrespect was overwhelming. She nodded again, her gaze dropping. I know. I'm so sorry. I got caught up in the mess I created and couldn't find a way out. She looked at me with an apologetic expression. You heard everything, didn't you? I nodded grimly. For a moment, she placed her hand on mine. I'm sorry, she repeated softly. You didn't deserve that. I made it all up. You were a good husband, just not the one I needed. A wave of helplessness washed over me, like a passenger in a car without brakes. The steering wheel was out of my control, and I didn't know how to stop the inevitable crash. It's not every day you go to a party as a married man and leave as a single father with a young daughter. It's not the kind of life script you'd find in a textbook. You know, they'll talk about this for a long time. They'll blame me, I said. She nodded. I know, and maybe that's fair. You were right, I replied. You should have just divorced me first. Do you have somewhere to go? She lowered her head, her hands moving nervously as the chaos of the situation continued to unfold. I'll figure something out soon. I imagined the conversations she would likely have with her boss. I wasn't sure if she'd keep her job. A lot would depend on how involved she'd been in this whole mess. I shook my head, trying to understand how it had all come to this. Chloe, how did it get to this point? Where is the woman I married? The one who was smart, knew what she wanted, kind, loyal, and loving? She paused, reflecting. It seems I lost myself. I became a manager and put ambition above everything else. I looked at her, really looked. Chloe, I loved you, and maybe I still do, but I can't stay here anymore. I'll be outside, waiting if the police come. If they take me in, please bail me out in the morning. You owe me that. She nodded. All right, Owen. She kept her word and bailed me out. That was the last time I saw her. By the time we met again, the divorce was finalized. She was no longer my wife. She was now someone else's responsibility. There was a time when I loved her deeply, when I imagined us growing old together. But in the end, she realized she didn't feel the same and chose betrayal over honesty, avoiding confrontation until there was no other way out. In my mind, that was the true story. She caused the pain, and I was left to recover. The path forward was lonely and painful. I healed slowly, piece by piece, and began to consider the idea of finding love again, though now with caution and skepticism. With a sweet, lively 5-year-old daughter depending on me, I couldn't afford to stay broken. Chloe left a mark on my life, but I wasn't defeated yet. I remembered a conversation with my friend Thomas about relationships and trust. I wondered how her reputation would survive this, now that everyone knew the truth. Every man who would come into her life would know her past, know what she had done, and I'd make sure they knew it too. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.